Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person, but what I would like to do is in the next 15 to 20 minutes give you a picture of the natural capital approach. And I make no bones about this. Natural capital is a hard concept, and it requires its own techniques, it requires its own hard analysis, it requires its own accounting, and what I'm going to try to do is give you a bit of a guide to how all this fits together. And I'll try to explain, in looking at the fitting together of all of this, how it differs from the conventional stuff that environmental economists and environmentalists generally have been working on in the cost-benefit analysis and ecosystem services framework. It's not that they're redundant, it's just that they are not, cost-benefit analysis and ecosystem service, the be-all and end-all full stop of how to think about the environment. So what I first want to do is just be clear what this concept is and what it isn't. So natural capital is about capital. It's about assets and not directly the services, though we're interested in the services that flow from them. What we want is to have the set of natural capital assets in place, which then provide the framework and the systems within which we as individuals can live good lives and industry and business and economy can flourish. So whether or not the assets translate directly into utility is an open question. But we don't start from a kind of utilitarianism and just utility and say whatever comes out of that box is the necessary set of assets. So start with the assets. And in the broader philosophical sense, this is about providing a natural environment for us as people to make the choices we want to make about our lives, and not simply to regard the environment as some kind of happiness machine. Now, we distinguish between renewables and non-renewables. And this is a very, very important distinction. So renewables are the stuff, the natural capital that nature gives us for free and forever, provided we don't trash them. Whereas non-renewables are things that nature gives us for free, oil, gas, minerals, etc. But once we use them once, that's it. And the choice between these two as to how we play things out in the economy is very different. So for renewables, the ones we're really worried about, that nature gives us free forever, what we're worried about is making sure that we don't take these stocks of these assets below a level, a threshold, where they can't carry on reproducing themselves. And since we don't know precisely where those thresholds are, we want to make sure they're within safe limits, and we might want bigger stocks, and that's all about benefit analysis. So although it's about systems rather than species, an easy example is to think about, say, North Sea herring. They've been swimming around there for a long time. They've been yielding food to us for almost all of human occupation of the British Isles. And they'll go on doing it for 100, 1,000, 100,000 years, indeed, till evolution catches up with them, provided we don't deplete them so they can't do that anymore. And given that we're extinguishing a huge number of species on the planet and taking out the natural capital assets that support them, we are, in many cases, doing this dangerous thing of going below the thresholds. For the non-renewables like, say, North Sea oil and gas, the answer there is that someone's going to use it, provided it isn't too polluting, and you can argue about that. But if we use it ourselves, and we have in Britain used it ourselves, we should leave some compensating benefit to future generations because they can't use it. So the renewables are the core issue in natural capital, but the compensation to future generations from non-renewable depletion is an important issue and an important source of finance. Now, I said that natural capital is not captured by conventional cost-benefit analysis. That's not because I think that cost-benefit analysis isn't useful. It has its part to play. And we have all sorts of exercises going on. Do a cost-benefit analysis of this, do a cost-benefit analysis of that. The point that you always have to have in mind is that cost-benefit analysis is about partial equilibrium, and it's a marginal concept about marginal changes. So it lends itself in economics to looking at the costs and benefits of a particular piece of capital, a sewage treatment works, electricity substation or whatever, a road or whatever. But the environment and natural capital isn't like that. It isn't about marginal changes, a bit here and a bit there. Take out a bit more of Exmoor's moorland and put a bit of farmland on it. What's the cost and benefit of doing that? Do a bit more pollution in the river or a bit less. What's the cost and benefits of doing it? Natural capital is about the system itself. And you either have the system or you don't, and you make choices about systems and about the state of the systems. And cost-benefit analysis can, in some regards, particularly in regard to the benefit side, be helpful, but it can't answer the question. And you always have to have that in mind. So we start with the existing capital stock. Where else could we start? We know it's not optimal. We know a lot of the stocks in river catchments, in the urban areas, in the uplands, are far from what would be best for us. But we start with those, and we don't think about marginal changes to them. We think about how to enhance the systems as a whole. About Lawton, about wildlife corridors, about river catchment corridors, and things of that sort. And what we're interested in is value, not utility, the value of the totality of the system. Now, I've laboured that point, but it really is important. Natural capital is a radically different idea from conventional cost-benefit analysis and partial equilibrium. It is, as I say, about assets and systems. And once you do that and recognise that, you start to say, so what are the main systems? What things really matter? And the answer is that just like we would say, what are the infrastructure systems in the physical capital world, electricity cables, the road systems, the rail, the broadband increasingly, water things, we can do that for natural capital. And these come in habitats and ecosystems and not species, although species are maybe important indicators. So what are the key infrastructures? Well, we can break it down. They're called river catchments. They're called landscape corridors, they're called urban networks, they're called marine habitats. And we can work at a slightly disaggregated level, although we want to connect these things up, on each of these. And that's exactly what has been done in setting up the pioneers in the 25-year plan. Now, for each of these, we need to do our capital accounting. And it's not an exciting thing for environmentalists to do, to go out in the countryside and work out what their spreadsheet of accounts looks like, but this is what we should do. We should treat these assets seriously, just like we would account and take seriously assets of any company, organisation, or any of the other physical infrastructures. So what do? We need a risk register first. We need to sort out which are the assets we've got, which are renewables, and which are non-renewables. So just getting a grip of what's there in an asset base, and then working out which of those assets in the renewables box are assets at risk is an important step forward. That's how you do it. Now, on that capital register, having split out the component parts, we're going to perhaps deplete non-renewables. Remember, they can't be used again. And so what we want to do is to work out what the value lost through depletion is that we need to compensate through investing the economic rents that accrue for the benefit of future generations, because we want to keep the net of the natural capital constant on a generational basis. And on the renewables, of course, we don't want any depreciation at all. We want on the capital register these assets to be assets in perpetuity, and that means that we have to provide capital maintenance for them. You have to maintain those assets as the first claim on operating costs of the business, operating revenues, before we think about capital enhancements. And the enhancements go on the balance sheet, having held the assets, the renewables assets, constant and compensated for the depreciation of the non-renewables. Sorry if that sounds complicated, sorry if that sounds very spreadsheet orientated, but unless you know what you've got, unless you know which assets to focus on, and unless you know in an accounting sense how you're doing, you're not going to be able to implement that natural capital approach properly. And just an aside, imagine if in our national income accounts we had to provide capital maintenance of all our infrastructures, physical and natural, and we had to provide for those by subtracting the costs of maintenance from current revenues. When the Chancellor of the Exchequer stood up and presented the national income accounts on that basis, you'd see we're not in the situation he might want to present us as being in. Actually, our underlying finances are much worse than they look, which is another way of saying unless you maintain your assets, you're living beyond your means. So it's those maintenance assets that matter, and how we do that. We need current cost accounting. We can't have any depreciation. We need to think about whether it's physical, mainly it's physical in the natural environment, or just operational maintenance we're involved in, which may be some of the physical infrastructures, and we need to make that operational cost deduction. That's what you're forced to do if you take natural capital seriously, and if you seriously did proper capital maintenance for your natural capital, that would be a quite radical departure from where we currently are. Which brings us to damage and compensation. Nobody can possibly believe that we're not going to do some more damage to natural capital. We are. We do it all the time. All of human history has been about damaging natural capital. But the difference in the natural capital approach is that if you want to maintain in aggregate your natural capital constant, then you have to provide compensation when you damage it, and that compensation has to be at least as good as the damage you've done. If you can't do the compensation, if it's not compensatable for, you might think, for example, even something like ancient woodlands, you can't reinvent them, and there's nothing you can do which would make them come back anytime soon, then just don't do it. But even there, remember, we're destroying a lot of ancient woodland to build HS2, and the choice is very straightforward. If you're going to do that, notwithstanding the damage, then you must compensate elsewhere in our natural environment by a substantial amount, enough to deal with what's there. And in my book, I set out two versions of what a natural capital aggregate rule might look like. I won't take you through them at the moment because of time short, but I'd urge you to think very hard about what the aggregate principle is and how, in relation to that, damage can be taken into account, what the compensation rules might look like and how they're implemented. And again, in my book, I deal with those in some considerable detail. So, how do we apply this to public policy? How do we bring this together? Well, we need an overall natural capital balance sheet. We need an overall national balance sheet. We need to know where we are. But then we need to decide what we want to do. And the government, through the white paper in 2011, through the manifestos of all the major parties in 2015, and in subsequent announcements, have committed themselves to leaving the natural environment in a better state for the next generation than the one we found it. And that's a great goal, and it's an extremely radical goal, and it's an extremely demanding goal, because the fact is we're going backwards, not forward. And if you really want to do this, if you mean what you say, then a lot's got to be done. Now, the good news is twofold. First of all, most, if not all, of what you would do to achieve that objective enhances sustainable economic growth. It's an absolute nonsense to imagine that the environment is at loggerheads with a properly measured economic growth path. Technology change goes on all the time. There are lots of reasons why we get better at doing lots of things. And if we enhance the natural environment, we will improve health, we'll improve educational opportunities, we'll make life better in all the wonderful ways which come from just sitting and contemplating nature, through to the landscapes, the carbon holding, the improvement in air quality. All of you will be well aware of just how much we could gain if we do this properly. Now, what the government said, what everyone backed in 2015 at least, is a 25-year plan to do this. This was proposed by the Natural Capital Committee, and then we proposed that this was broken down into pilots in these key infrastructure systems. These pilots have been set up, they're ongoing, a great deal is being learned from them, and in each of them we're identifying enhancements and new system opportunities. Now, that's just the beginning. There's so much more to add to this, and there are lots of opportunities. You might not be pro-Brexit. I am definitely not a Brexiteer. I'm a Remainer. I've always been of that mind. But very few people could doubt that getting rid of the Common Agricultural Policy is a very good thing. So we have the whole of agricultural policy in play. And the good news here is that it's at the moment a serious drag on economic growth. It's a serious drag on the environment, and almost anyone with an ounce of knowledge could work out that if you're going to spend $3 billion on agricultural supports directly and all the other supports, the tax reliefs, the rates reliefs, the diesel relief, if you're going to give all this paraphernalia of support, then you must be able to do substantially better than where we are. So the game in town now is to think through exactly what that 25-year plan looks like, and that's not the end of the matter, that's the beginning. That's the point where we march on and we put together a enduring, continuous process of enhancement focused overwhelmingly on those renewable natural assets identified at the beginning. And wow, what an opportunity. This is a fantastic moment if you're concerned about our natural environment. There is actually the glimmer, the possibility that we can do something really substantial, that this could be, when we look back in 50 years' time, the point where we stopped the rot, we went in the right direction, we made the citizens' lives better, we made our natural biodiversity better, we made our landscapes better, and we made our economic growth higher as a result. What's not to like about that? Thank you very much.